Hello and welcome to this live discussion focused on the topic of driving equity at work for persons with disabilities. I'm Emma Walden, host and correspondent at some of the globe's leading industry events, and today I'm delighted to be joined by an exceptional panel ready to explore these workplace experiences and the impacts they have. In a world of talent scarcity, it's vital that organisations provide equitable career opportunities for all talent groups. Yet new Randstad research has found that nearly 2 in 5 persons with disabilities, that's 39%, have faced discrimination or prejudice at work. Well, today, with the help of our expert guests, we'll be exploring what steps employers can take to drive equity and empower this talent pool to unlock their potential. I'm delighted that joining me today are Audra Jenkins, Global Chief Equity Officer at Randstad. Audra, hello.
Hi, Emma.
And we have Beth Sirull, President and CEO of the National Organisation on Disability US. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me.
And Melisande Kingchatchaval Schifter, Executive Director, Global Inclusion and Diversity Strategy and Market Integration at Bristol Myers Squibb. Welcome.
Thanks, Emma. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, you may also have seen, our audience may have seen that Mike Smith, Chief Executive of Randstad Enterprise, was also due to be part of our conversation today. Unfortunately, Mike is unwell today, so not able to join us, but of course we wish him a speedy recovery. So, Audra, if I could hand over to you now to begin, and you can set out the scene for today's event for us.
All right. Thank you so much, Emma. For our visual impaired viewers, I'm Audra Jenkins. I'm an African-American female. I'm wearing a teal blazer with a black blouse with medium length hair. As the Global Chief Equity Officer at Randstad, I'm honored to participate in this pivotal event focused on advancing workplace equity for individuals with disabilities. It's an incredible opportunity to engage alongside such an esteemed group of speakers whose work I deeply respect, not only professionally, but also personally as someone with an invisible disability. At Randstad, we're committed to fostering inclusive environments by building trust through our values and our global local 3+1 ED&I strategy, focused on empowering women, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus individuals, and underserved populations. By collaborating with our people, clients, communities, and partners, we aim to become the world's most equitable and specialized talent company. I'm such an honor to be with this panel because this panel embodies the mission showcasing our collective efforts and of our team. With our partners with NOD, Beth, proud to have you here as our long-term partner. Thank you, Beth. And we are the recipient of the NOD Leading Disability Employer Award for the past 6 years. So very proud of that honor, Beth. Thank you for that. We have Melisande here, our client with Bristol Myers Squibb. And then, of course, you, our LinkedIn Live viewers, as our community. So let's use this moment to inspire a meaningful action. And let's start with really what is workplace accessibility? It really means that we're creating an environment where people with disabilities can fully participate, thrive, and contribute by removing barriers and providing tools and support and inclusivity needed for equal opportunity and success. So before I hand it back to Emma, I'm going to pose a question to Beth and Melisande. What are some main benefits you've seen from driving equity at work for persons with disabilities?
I'll jump in first. So I'm Beth Sirull. As Audra and Emma said, I am the President and CEO of the National Organization on Disability. And today I'm a white presenting woman with short bobbed hair that is brown but increasingly silver, and I am wearing a pink sweater. I would say the number one benefit of driving equity for persons with disabilities is really around driving psychological safety for everyone on the workforce. In terms of DEI and inclusion, disability has kind of been the last, or one of the last frontiers. And when you drive equity for people with disabilities, you're driving that psychological safety for people with disabilities, but really for the entire workforce. And when you drive that psychological safety, that's what drives innovation and creativity, intelligent risk-taking. And those are the key building blocks of a really profitable and successful business. So that's one. And the second I'll add, and we're going to go into others as we talk today, but As Audra said, Randstad won the NOD seal for several years now. Driving disability inclusion drives your company's reputation as an employer, and it enables you to attract the best talent on the planet. And that too is really the key. If you hire the best talent and you make them feel psychologically safe, you have two of the most critical building blocks of a successful business. So I'll turn it over to Melisande now.
Yeah, I love that, Beth. And hi, everyone. I'm Melisande for the quick audio introduction as well. I am a mixed race Thai German woman. I have short black hair. I'm wearing a blue jumpsuit with golden elements and matching golden earrings. And as Emma had introduced me, I work for the biopharma company Bristol Squibb. I'm the head of D&I and market integration there. And my role really means to bring an inclusion lens into our products, our drugs, into our manufacturing, the way we package, into our marketing and distribution, so that our medicine can truly help everyone prevail serious diseases, and that our medicine really works for everyone and works on everyone and reaches everyone and is accessible and usable to everyone. And so when you hear me talk about my work in that way already, coming back to Audra's opening question, the main benefit for me is very simple. In the capitalist system that we operate in the corporate sector, any business is about innovation and growth. And when you center your products, your services, your designs around accessibility and disability inclusion, we have traditionally achieved the greatest innovations. Why is that? Because it means that when we do that, whatever we're doing actually works for everyone. It's what we call universal design. Beth, I heard you speak about that as well. I think we don't talk about disability and innovation enough. It's almost like one of our greatest historic oversights. And that mostly is because we still carry a little bit of that, old view in us that may be called the soft bigotry of low expectations. So that's actually a quote from George W. Bush, which he used in relation to African-American kids in school. But I think it applies and maybe even applies, more on disability too, that we have that soft bigotry of low expectations. And, at times are speaking to grown adults as if they were children and acting as if we're doing them a favor by infantilizing them. So if we in a business are putting on a different lens and seeing this is actually core to what we're doing here, driving innovation and growth, and seeing disability inclusion and accessibility as a driver of that, that's when we can change the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Audra, for your introduction, and to our panel there for those initial brilliant thoughts. I can sense we're going to have a lively discussion and lots of optimistic views. So continuing that discussion around the current situation for persons with disabilities in the workplace, Beth, if I could start with you. Broadly, do you see the experience changing? I mean, could you point perhaps to one clear shift you're seeing now in the way people are being treated, perhaps compared to, say, 10 years ago?
So many things have changed in 10 years. I think the first and the most obvious changes have to do with technology, which I know we're going to talk about more, but the average accommodation today for a person with a disability costs less than $500. And there's just enormous, from the closed captioning to the screen readers and the GPS guides and, and these things, as Melisande alluded to, they're good for a lot of people. There's that curb effect, we call it in the States, that, when you cut the curb for wheelchairs, it became a huge advantage for lots of people who don't have a disability, for the person with a stroller, for the runner, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of technology that is really shifting the experience for persons with disabilities, but also shifting the experience for everyone. Particularly in the States in the last 10 years, we've seen really the incorporation of disability into DEI strategies, whereas when DEI started, it was very, very focused, and still is to a large degree, on race and gender and sexual orientation. But in the last 10 years, we've really seen disabilities claim their role in DEI, and that some of that is a combination of many places in the world of regulatory and social influences, and that I think has had an influence globally. What it's going to be interesting to see as we look forward is that disability or diversity, equity, and inclusion is really under threat in the United States now. And it's going to be interesting to see going forward. I think we're really making the case that this is really about talent management. It's about talent acquisition and talent retention and leveraging talent, getting the most from your talent for your business. And that really makes it about belonging more than anything else. And I think that's sort of where we've been in 10 years and where we're going. We have seen increased regulation in a number of places. I know in the EU, there are, fines are now, if you're not meeting certain targets. And I just want to note that, the regulation can have a two-edged sword, because you require it and you penalize a company for not doing it. And sometimes they just decide that not doing it, it's better to just pay up than to comply. And so, as is often the case with regulation, the law of unintended consequences really needs to be thought about. But we do have many more policymakers thinking about these issues. It's much more center stage than it was 10 years ago. And the third observation I would make is that this is data that's being collected and tracked and looked at, and that's really critical. So the NOD's employment tracker, which is has been our annual survey for companies, how you win the NOD seal, it's 11 years old, and it was the first such instrument, definitely in the United States, and it probably the first such instrument in the world. And that's only 11 years ago. And a lot's happened in 10 years, and this year we've completely revised that instrument. It's now called the Disability Inclusion Blueprint. And it really looks at where we're at now and asks the questions that need to be asked now that particularly drive outcomes, and every question is tracked to an outcome. And when you're done with it, you have a blueprint of how to go forward. And 10 years ago, no one was tracking really anything. And, we've all heard that management phrase that, what gets measured gets managed. And there's a lot of truth to that, I think. And so the data, more and more companies are paying attention to that data, are providing that data, or are at least collecting it internally and looking at it. And, we're proud to be a big part of that effort. But I think it's not to be, people think, oh, it's just data, but the data is really important because people act on data. So that would be 3 changes, I think, that I've seen in the 10 years.
Thank you, Beth. Really interesting observations there around sort of benefits and improvements made actually benefiting all
Yes.
as well, sort of the wider society, if you like. Melisande, how have you seen conversations around disability equity evolve through your career, and what do you see as the next sort of major milestone, if you like, as we look to improve equity for persons with disabilities?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Beth was saying. So the first thing to start is that we have, first of all, started to talk about disability, right? If I go back, not even 10 years ago, you would get statistics that 90% of business were actually claimed to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion, but only 4% of them included disability within that, right? So it was the one that kind of always dropped off the plate. And what I've seen through these last years, and also, of course, through initiatives that have evolved, etc., is a huge increase of confidence and competence when it comes to including disability at work. And that starts with the leadership level, right? That's why it was so great to also see from your side, Audra from Randstad, to have Mike here, even though he can't join us today. Well wishes again for him to get better. But I think it's exactly that, right? We're seeing leadership gaining confidence in that. Because and competence and what disability inclusion means. What that also leads to then is the second thing, and it comes back to what I was saying earlier in the beginning, is a shift almost from what I want to call the old charitable model, right? Where we're bringing disabled people as a charity initiative to really strategically embedding disability inclusion and accessibility and principles of universal designs into our business strategy and into everything we do, and seeing the advantage in that. So when I was saying disabled people have, driven innovation from the beginning of humanity, I was lying. So I can give you a couple of examples here just to give it a bit of touch and feel, right? The typewriter, as one example, going a bit further back, was invented to help a blind woman write, right? And we see what the typewriter has led to even today with the keyboard that we're still using. The remote control was originally designed for and by individuals with limited mobility. Again, we're all using it in all spheres of life now. And being here on a virtual call together, but I'm not using it right now, but you all know the blurred background that you can put on that, serves everyone if you don't necessarily want to have them see your private space or wherever you are at. That was originally designed by Microsoft's accessibility team for people using sign language, so you could decrease the background distractions as they're following the conversation. So these are just 3 examples where you can see accessibility was really put at the center and how it benefits all of us. And Accenture did a study there a couple of years ago that showed that companies who are prioritizing accessibility in their products increase revenue by 28%. So that's a change I see, Emma, where that thinking, I think, was not as strong and was more niche than normal, right? I think it moved from niche to more normal now. And understanding that when we hire disabled people, we already spoke about the war of talent, aging society, we know the drivers as to why we have to do that as well, but also how to bring that to life in the workplace, and really seeing disabled people as excellent professionals in driving our business.
Melisande, thank you, and really just bringing that conversation there into the mainstream, as you say, that being part of everyday conversations at work. Audra, with that in mind, though, it is important to recognise that not all disabilities are the same, and that persons with disabilities may have very different career experiences as well. Do you think enough's being done to provide personalised responses to differing accessibility needs with that wider perspective that Beth and Melisande have already given us there?
Thank you, Emma. I think Melisande is on something wonderful, which just said. There's a quote by Robert Hensel that says, "There's no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more." So I think if we stop looking at the condition and looking at the person, that we can recognize, meet those varying needs. Accessibility could mean different things. It can mean physical, sensory, cognitive, neurological differences. there's a wide variety of things that fall under accessibility. And there is no one size fits all. It has to be addressed, customized to fit the solution for the person to meet their individual needs so they can thrive in the organization. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is where organizations fail is the lack of awareness. You have to really create a sense from the leadership, most top part of your leadership, your organization, to the most entry level position of your company, that this is a place where we value differences. And lack of understanding does not negate the need for having those tough conversations to understand what is it that someone needs to be successful in their job. One thing I wanted to call out as an example, while working here at Randstad, I had an employee at one point in my long career here who was not taking this mandatory global training, this compliance training. And I kept saying, well, are you going to take this training? He said, yes, yes, yes. And I was like, well, okay, we need to get it done because there's a deadline here. And it comes to find out that the reason he didn't take the training was that he had a learning disability. And so he was dyslexic. So it was very difficult to manage with, at that time, to do this online training. So when he disclosed that, we were able to modify and make accommodations for him. But we don't want people to live in shame because your disability is not making you less than. It is just one more thing to be impressed with. You have to overcome to do things that we take for granted. So I think that awareness leads to action. It leads to inclusivity, a more powerful conversation, a better connectivity with that person. And what did it cost us? Very little to make that accessible modification so that this person could take this training and get that mandatory training, get that completed. So disparities exist across, different organizations, different regions, for sure. It's up to us as the employer to take the step to understand what are the unique needs of the individual and what can we do. Every one of us can do something. We just have to explore what is that and what do they really need for their job.
Audra, thank you. So while improvements are being seen, there's still more to do, and providing a more equitable experience of work is not only the right thing to do morally, but in the face of talent scarcity, as you've already touched on today, providing all workers with equitable opportunities is vital to ensuring that we're all benefiting from the most talented workforce too. So Melisande, can you tell us about some of the initiatives you've seen implemented to tackle inequity for persons with disabilities, and what steps have you seen being taken to attract, retain and empower talent within this group?
Yes. So I really love what you were just saying, Audra, and I think the one point I want to pick up on that you were referencing was the lack of awareness, right? So I actually want to start there just with a couple of data, because when we look at talent, and you just mentioned that, Emma, how do we attract, retain, empower disabled professionals? The first thing to know is 80% of disabilities are invisible, right? So we always have an image of, that person in a wheelchair, also because that has kind of become the icon. But disability can mean so many more things. I personally have an invisible disability. I'm hard of hearing, and there are many, many more other examples like that. So you may not even know who is in your workforce, or who may be applying, or who you may be attracting that has a disability. The second thing is to keep in mind that the majority of disabilities are not acquired by birth, but they're acquired between the working age, actually, so between 18 and 64. So that also means it's not a static group, and some of your existing workforce might actually develop or acquire a disability over the course of their employment with you, right? And now, the other thing that I want to bring up as well as my last data point here is there have been different surveys done. This one is specifically now on the UK, but I think it applies to frankly any nation across the globe. In the UK, in a survey they did recently, 65% of people said that they avoid talking to disabled people because they make them feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think that is something that disabled people can feel, and that's, you know, if that's true, 2/3 of the population is uncomfortable with disability. That also means in a workplace where we need to start is actually with a change of culture. Because if that's true, your employees might not even feel comfortable to disclose their disability or even ask for accommodation, be that in the you know, recruitment process, be it during employment and beyond. So that's maybe the first thing where we as an employer need to start to tackle the inequity. The second thing then, and that's the, you know, the very famous quote from the disability community is "nothing for us without us." So if you're starting to change systems, if you're looking at your recruitment or, you know, your development, learning and development programs, etc., involve and center it around people with disabilities to see what is needed. Don't make assumptions, right? And then I think, look, the last thing I'm going to say is that when we look at attraction and retaining, like just looking at the recruitment process, it comes back to what I was saying earlier, universal design. I don't think that the recruitment process at this stage, as we traditionally do it, is working for anyone. Frankly, you know, I don't think interviews have traditionally worked for anyone, especially if you're going through 12 rounds of it. And we've seen examples, like, I love bringing this one up, you know, Brian Acton, who, a business leader, he applied for Facebook multiple times, was rejected, then went on to co-found WhatsApp, which Facebook bought 5 years later for $19 billion, right? So that shows you that fundamentally there is something wrong with our recruitment process. And I think whenever we actually have implemented processes that were designed around giving more accessibility, it has really served everyone. If you look at neurodiverse programs, for example, hiring candidates with neurodiversity who at times were allowed to get a second chance, for example, right? If they felt like that first interview didn't work right, can I have a second one? You've seen companies do that as their, you know, neurodiverse hiring program. That actually serves everyone, right? So these are just some examples to give here to your question.
Melisande, thank you. Great observations there around including everybody in the conversation to actually create change that's going to be helpful and useful to everyone. Beth, more broadly, what steps can organisations take to provide a more equitable working experience? You know, just around what Melisande said there, and how is your organisation supporting employers as they implement those changes?
So there is a lot that organizations can do, and I noted on the schedule that I have 4 minutes, so we could go on for hours and hours on what organizations could do, but I'm going to highlight a few things. But I want to sort of integrate a couple things that Audra and Melisande have said. You know, the notion of senior leaders, and yes, you know, Mike is not well, but he's here in spirit. You know, a few years ago, you would never have seen a CEO on a panel like this, but even more importantly, we're seeing increasingly that C-suite leaders are standing up and saying, I too have an invisible disability. Here's how I've struggled with mental health, or, you know, I'm dyslexic and no one knows it, but I'm willing to share that. And so, you know, at a very high level, something that corporations can do is really encourage their leaders to model the behavior of self-ID, or of saying, hey, I have someone in my family, I have been a caretaker, my child, or me, you know, we know increasingly that the percentage of people who have not struggled with a mental health challenge at some point in their life is shrinking. I mean, it's just becoming a pervasive issue, particularly post-pandemic. And the more that people will stand up and share publicly, you know, I personally have a long history in mental health challenges, as does my child who's neurodiverse. And the more that you stand up and say that, the more normalized it becomes. And the more that we see that in the public sphere, as well as in the C-suite, the governor of California is dyslexic. And, that came out well into his career. But you start to model for people that it's okay to stand up and say that. That is something that corporations can encourage people to do. And of course, that encouragement starts at the very top. So I think that is a really important general thing. And also to what Melisande said, is the nothing about us without us. When you listen, it's not like you listen once and you create your policies and you're done. You have to listen consistently and regularly. And I think, that is really, really important. And you have to ask the questions that bring out the non-apparent disabilities, not just the ones that we can see, because as we've said, historically, everyone has that vision in their head of the person in the wheelchair, but there's so much more to it. More specifically, we look at inclusion at every stage of the employee life cycle, from recruitment to hiring and onboarding, to managing, developing, promoting, retaining. And there are steps that corporations can take everywhere across that life cycle. We talked a minute ago, about the interview process. Well, even before the interview process, there's a job description. And so often the job description has skills or qualifications that are listed that aren't really reflective or essential to the job, and they exclude people. So the first step is to make sure that you're defining what's essential and required by, what's really required. And, an essential skill is one that if you took it away, the job couldn't be done. And beyond that, you need to have a broader view, and you'll bring in more diverse talent. You'll have more diverse perspectives, which leads to greater innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Again, relative to the interviewing process, particularly for people who are neurodiverse, providing the questions in advance can make a big difference. Now, clearly, if you're hiring for a position where being able to think quickly on your feet, like say for a sales job, then it doesn't make sense to provide the question in advance, because a critical skill is the ability to answer questions, on your feet. But for many a job, a coding job, a writing job, many jobs, that's not a critical skill. And not, so you can avoid having to give someone the second chance, just provide them with the accommodation in advance, because it's not a critical skill to the job. When you're onboarding, like to the training point that Audra mentioned, make sure that all your materials that you use in onboarding are accessible to everyone, and that they can access them in the form that makes it most efficient for them to absorb the data, the information. And some of this is standard HR, check in, that 45-day, hey, how's it going? That 90-day formal review, and really asking at those times, how did the onboarding process go, so that you're listening and you're getting feedback all the time, so that you're improving that for the next employee. Obviously, the accommodations process for employees, the best companies are responding to accommodations requests in under a week, and they're involving their employees in the process. So you don't just say, employee doesn't just say, this is what I need, and employer says yes or no. Let's really talk about what the job needs, what the person needs, and make that happen. As I said, 4 minutes is nowhere near enough time. Let me just pick out one or two. This is a one that I think is really important about when you're talking about development opportunities, that never assume that someone can or cannot take advantage of a development or a leadership opportunity. Like, you may see someone who in a wheelchair, for example, and say, well, they can't do this because they can't travel. You should never make that assumption. The same way you should not make that assumption of a parent who has young children and think, oh, they have young kids, they're not going to want to go to this conference. You should always ask and open opportunities to your highest potential employees. And a key sort of piece of that is the difference between development opportunities and leadership opportunities. And development opportunities are skill development for the job that you have, but leadership opportunities are those opportunities that sort of lead you to that next level. And again, if you have a high potential employee based on their performance, you should never make assumptions and really should try to make all of those opportunities, accessible to everyone based on their based on their potential as an employee.
So never making assumptions, Beth, and there's lots of ideas there about what.
Yeah. Sorry, I could rant on this for a very long time, but
absolutely
that gives everybody
great insights to hear.
Everybody a sense, and of course, that's what NOD does all day long, is help employers look at where they're at and what they've done and what they need to do to move down that disability inclusion journey, which moves them down the inclusion journey, period.
Yeah, you absolutely see it every day with what you're doing.
Yes.
So it's fantastic to have your insights. And with all of that in mind and what Beth just talked about there, Audra, what would you describe as perhaps the wider risks of not addressing equity issues in a talent scarce world that we've been describing there? If you don't take those measures and you don't do the things that Melisande and Beth have talked about there, what are the wider risks involved?
Yeah, thank you for that, Emma, and thank you, Beth and Melisande. A great way to tee up this question. I would say that the bigger risk is you're constraining an already limited talent pool, a scarce talent pool, by not tapping into the full potential of the talent pool and getting people with disabilities in your workforce. I think that's important. I think the second thing is you need to really understand that when we are not tapping into full talent pool, we're missing opportunities. This can impact your existing employees and retention because they may be burned out because they're having to do more work because you don't have the resources there to supplement. So they'll get burned out and feel undervalued, and they'll leave. They'll feel undervalued and excluded in the company, and that you don't really think of them or have a really high regard for them. I think it also impacts your societal reputational risk. Companies that are inequitable face a lot of backlash. They can damage their brand, their image, their customer loyalty, ability to attract other talent, in the future. And I think it also impacts your finances, your global competitiveness. If you can't prioritize this to give yourself a global competitive edge, you're also looking at missing out on people. Some of your talent are also your customers. So you need to think about that. I mean, I think that's one of the things I'm always thinking of. We're in the business in Randstad of putting people to work. And so if we don't treat people well in between, behind our doors, it's difficult to attract other people to go out and work at organizations that we value, like Melisande's company, Bristol Squibb. So I think those are the big ones, I would say. And then finally, it's an erosion of trust. When you ignore that social contract between organizations and the workforce, it leads to a lot of disengagement and a lot of resentment. And we do touch on this in our latest report on equity and AI.
Well, we're talking about that area now, and it is a very interesting area in relation to this important topic, artificial intelligence. It's been said that AI can be a great leveler for underrepresented groups, and the technology does seem to be helping to improve equity, with almost half of persons with disabilities saying it has done so. But there is greater potential here and further efforts that obviously can be made. Audra, research also tells us that people with disabilities are significantly more likely to leave their jobs if their employer fails to provide the AI upskilling opportunities compared to persons without disabilities. So, there's so much to talk about there. How can organisations work closely with the talent within this group to ensure that they understand their needs and motivations, both in terms of technology and more broadly, I guess?
I think it starts with looking at how we train employees in general. I think Beth touched on this a little bit. Do we have accessible training platforms, and how do we bring AI into that to address both the technical issues and the accessibility challenges of that. I think the second one is the design. Is it training that's designed with AI tools, with accessibility in mind, to ensure that we have the equitable participation? And then the third thing is, how do we engage employees in that design process? Melisande and Beth touched on this earlier. If you involve people with disabilities in developing testing, those type of training programs, that ensure real world needs or challenges are met. And then you can also address barriers to participation. Like, how do we, maybe the training could be at a time that we need to have a flexible training schedule to meet the needs of someone that may have unique needs, and maybe they don't train well in the middle of the day, or their energy's low in the afternoon. There's a lot of different things that we can do to accommodate. I think that's really important. But mostly I want to call out that it starts with an inclusive culture, and we have to make sure that AI is an enabler and not a barrier for employees with disabilities. I'm really proud at Randstad that we have updated our global ED&I policy, and we added the ethical and inclusive use of AI in there, and that will help us with our AI upskilling and our retention rates overall.
Beth, how do you see AI improving accessibility when you're talking to employers, and what are its limitations at the moment?
Well, it has been and continues to be great upsides. And across all manner of disabilities, speech to text, text to speech, the real-time captioning that I'm sure that many people are taking advantage of, as we're sitting here. It's translation tools. All of that is screen readers, people who are visually impaired, hearing impaired. But we also, people who are mobility impaired. I think, as Melisande said about the remote control, you see increasing automated task assistance. We've got our friends at Siri and Alexa. And we've, got improved navigational tools for other kinds of mobility issues. There's really a tremendous in the last few years, and going forward, it will undoubtedly explode. But there are, risks associated and some downsides. And actually, Audra, when you were sort of listing all the risks, the downsides of not pursuing disability inclusion, it was reminding me that, particularly when we're early, or speaking with a company that's early on in the journey, risk management often will draw their attention. Because you do have compliance risks and reputation risks and things like that. And so, that it's important as we look at AI, as when we look at anything else, that we're keeping those, that we're keeping those in mind. I think the biggest risk in AI in our mind is about the risk of bias and anti-inclusivity, because AI, it's only as good as the algorithm, the algorithm's only as good as the data that goes into training it. And sometimes, those applications that scan resumes can inadvertently have biases that sort of scan out from an inclusive perspective. And so we really need to make sure, as we're building these algorithms, that they don't have those kinds of biases, and that they are very inclusive. But then, of course, you want that resume reader to pick the people who are most likely to be, trained for the job. So it's a fine line, but that potential bias is a really important red flag that we really need to be thinking about. And of course, some of these new technologies are not cheap, particularly for smaller and mid-size, SMEs, for small and mid-sized enterprises, can be very difficult to afford that. Some of them are very, just complex and hard for some people to use, particularly people who have some cognitive issues that can be very difficult. Some of them are inconsistent. It's some of we're in the babyhood or the toddlerhood of some of these products, and so we need to monitor all of those things as they go into adolescence and adulthood, as it were.
Given what Beth's just been saying there, Melisande, what would you say are the considerations that need to be, taken to ensure that technology is actually driving equity forward and it's not sort of a barrier?
Yeah, I I might want to add a different lens, since, you know, both Beth and Audra were already speaking more about the AI side of it, and bring a perspective here of accessibility from the point of view of affordability. Actually, I think what technology now, when you know, you've heard me talk this whole session about this move from niche to normal. When technology does that, it also is actually able to tap into a massive market that I think right now has been overlooked in terms of the disability inclusion market, which is estimated at $1 trillion US. And to give you a very concrete example that's also close to my own lived experience, hearing aids, right? So when I first started using hearing aids, I always thought like, oh, actually a lot of the technology is kind of almost an advanced version of an iPod, right? Of an earpod. There you go. And then I saw over time how tech companies were picking that up and actually making it better. Now, what was happening though is that the affordability of those, you know, earpods or whatever you want to call it, whatever brand you want to use, has went from niche to normal and became more and more affordable, where hearing aids remained and stagnated at being incredibly expensive. And there are so many actually countries where hearing aids are not covered by health insurance. So it becomes an affordability issue. And what we've seen, particularly in the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, is tech companies picking up on that. So you might have seen the latest release of the Apple iPhone in September, and how now in the new iPod function, you have a hearing aid function within that, right? Before Apple actually both started to sell and develop over-the-counter hearing aids. I might be wrong right now. I think it's been 1 or 2 years that they did that. And so this is seeing, you know, the technology exists. I'm not an iPhone developer, but it's pretty much the same technology as a user, I can tell you that. But all of a sudden it goes to market, and I think companies are seeing that universal design that I was describing, but also what that actually does for the disability community is bringing access in form of affordability, which we haven't really talked about yet on this call, but is a huge issue as well if we think of assistive technology for the community.
Room for a whole nother conversation there, Melisande, as you say. A lot covered from all of you there, and as a result we've had a few good questions coming in from the audience. So if we've got a very brief amount of time to cover a couple of those, so just starting with you, Beth, how can organisations collaborate more with government and educators to ensure people with disabilities experience improvements? And I guess there Melisande touched on how corporates are actually coming up with products, but what is it about collaboration with institutions that could actually improve the outlook and equity throughout people's lives?
Well, I think the university collaboration is a really important one, and it's a good question. You know, the number of college graduates with disabilities has grown, and the services, I mean, more and more universities have, you know, areas where they're helping regardless of what type of disability a student has. But we know that often in universities, the career services department and the department that's helping people with disabilities don't always talk to each other. Never mind that talking to the corporation. So, you know, when you're recruiting for those entry-level jobs, you know, when you're going to campus, to really say, you know, we want to make a conscious effort to include people with disabilities. You know, to have an initiative we're seeing more and more, I think, Melisande, you mentioned this, around initiatives to hire the neurodiverse. And, we know that, certain neuro atypical, that, are often super good at certain jobs, particularly in, the big classic example is about autism and coding. And so that one partnership is between the corporation and the university, and to extend that partnership beyond the career services, but to include and make sure, really encourage career services to be bringing in people with disabilities. I think from a government perspective, it's a hard one, because influencing government is increasingly difficult. But like today, while we're on this call, a change to regulations being posted by the Department of Labor in the United States today, having to do with what we call the sub-minimum wage, that it is still legal in many places in the United States to pay people with disabilities less than the minimum wage. It's abysmal. I mean, I won't even go down that rabbit hole. But there's this new regulation which would eliminate that, is being posted today for comment. And it would make a huge difference if corporations would comment and say, this new regulation is a good idea, because we see that people with disabilities can be fully integrated into employment and don't need to be in what we used to call a sheltered workshop. And we're actually going to be encouraging companies to do that in the coming days.
And it absolutely ties in with what Melisande was saying there about affordability, if people are
Right.
not being treated properly on that front. Well, we're running out of time, and I just wanted to get to one final question with you all, really, which is a conclusion to our conversation. And it's really, if you could give one key piece of advice to organisations that wish to improve the workplace experiences for persons with disabilities, what would it be? So, Melisande, if I could start with you.
Fire round, right? I would say change the default. And what I mean by that is, let me bring it to life with one example, right? Remote work, we're all dialed in here, actually from 3 different continents. All of this has become really possible during the COVID pandemic, right? But if you look at the disability community has been advocating for remote work for so long. And so if you wanted to make that stick, again, the niche to normal, you need to change the default. That's what we did with COVID, and that benefited, specifically also the disability community. But so instead of asking a question, are you working from home today, to say, why are you in the office? Couldn't you work from home, right? I think that's what I mean with change the default for a more disability inclusive organization.
Brilliant. Niche to normal. I love that. Beth, your final thoughts?
I hate these one thing questions, because there's always so many. But, if I were just going to have one word, I would say listen. Listen to your employees and take into account what they need. Listening. If you don't listen to your employees, you don't have an engaged workforce. And if you and the stats on employee engagement are abysmal right now. The percentage of employees who don't feel engaged in their work, who just kind of go through the motions, is very high. Listen to your employees, respond to their needs. And that will, by definition, that will change the default. Because to change the default, you have to listen. I'm with Melisande, but to do that, you got to listen to your employees, and that will instruct you on the new default.
I hope they've been listening to you today as well, Beth. And Audra, just finally from you, your final thought.
Thank you, Emma. A wonderful panel today. I would say psychological safety. Leaders need to really create psychological safety so that they can ask questions about what they need, and they can talk about what
Right.
they expect to see in the workplace from an accessibility perspective. And I'm so proud. I'm sorry Mike couldn't be here today, but he's also the executive sponsor of our Global Alliance for Disability and Allies employee resource group. He has brought on Made by Dyslexia, Value 500, lots of disability organizations that we are proud to partner and affiliate with, like NOD. So, thanks for Mike, and shout out to all our leaders that are creating psychological safe workplaces.
And get well soon tonight too. Well, Melisande, Beth, Audra, thank you so much for your insights today. It's been an inspiring discussion, and thank you also to our audience for your engagement and questions you were asking. Before closing, a final reminder that if you'd like to dive a little deeper into the research and advice around this topic, you can download Randstad's latest report on understanding talent scarcity, AI and equity by following the link in the comments below. For now, though, from me and my brilliant guests, thank you for watching and goodbye.